In this lesson, we're going to take a look at how we should set up our UV map in order to avoid common issues that occur when texturing the model and presenting it in game. I went around and I searched for an image on the web that I could show you as an example of why you want to set up your UV map in order to avoid common issues. One of them is the texture seam. As you can see here, this model has been textured, and this isn't exactly the best example, but it's the only one I could find right now. So what you're seeing here is you have an upper body part of this model and it's textured, and then there's a lower body model that's textured, and you get this black seam that's going around. Now what's occurred here is the texture has a black background around it, around these blue shirt pieces. And that's caused, when you zoom out on the model, what happens is you can see the border going around the model. That's why you want to add in a similar color behind your texture or around your texture of your UV map. So let me show you another example real fast. Now here I've come into Photoshop just to show you an example of a texture that I developed recently, where I took my UV maps and I set them up in a manner to where I could have similar colored areas kind of together or grouped. That way I could change the background to be a sort of color that kind of matches the texture itself. And to show you an example, I'll go ahead and hide everything. And you can see that in the areas where I have this garment pieces, what I've done is I've taken a sample of this and I've painted the area behind these textures a similar color to this, so when I zoom out I don't get this issue here. And down here you can see that I have some areas of my texture where it's sort of a cuff, and this was a slave garment. So you had sort of a burlap texture, and then I had a cuff for this outfit, and I wanted that cuff to have a background color behind it to avoid that texture seam that was similar to the texture of the cuff itself. So when you zoomed out and you got that LOD mismatch, you would not see the seam as clearly. For instance, if this was all white and I were to zoom out in certain game engines from this cuff, you may see a white border around the model itself where the texture seams are. Now texture seams, if I were to go into the UV texture editor real fast, let's go ahead and set this up because I don't know why I wasn't doing this before, because it's really annoying to have that window up here for your UV texture editor. Come over here and in your viewport options, I want you to go ahead and pick one of these. I've just selected one. Don't select one of the top or the second one down. Just go ahead and select one of the other ones. Probably the fourth one down is a good one. Just right click on it and go ahead and find perspective and UV texture editor and go ahead and select that. And that way you have it set in a viewport window, and it'll be over here for you to easily access anytime you need to get to UV mapping. That way I can select the model, focus on it, and I can rotate around it without having to move my UV texture editor out of the way. This is just a lot more convenient. This is usually the way I do it. So what we want to do is we want to separate different areas of the model in our UV map so that way that they're not conflicting. So for instance, my sword blade part, I want all the blade shells to be sort of over here, but I don't want my handle to be close to this because these are going to be a different texture. So what I'll want to do is just right click in the UV texture editor, go to shell, and I'm going to select everything that's going to be fairly a similar color when I'm done texturing it. So I think I'm going to select all the balls, and I'm going to hold down Control Shift to make sure I get everything selected. So the hilt and the balls, and I'm just going to press W, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to move these up and pick a spot somewhere where they're sort of separated from the blade itself. And this looks pretty good here. So I'll just go ahead and take these ball pieces. I'm just going to sort it myself and just kind of get a nice sort to my model here. And one thing I can do is kind of group these balls kind of together. So this piece here, so I'll just go ahead and grab all of these on this side to make sure I have just these ones. And now I know which ones they are, and I'll keep these grouped together. So when I'm texturing this, it'll be a little bit easier. So this is my top, so I'll put this on the left, and I'll put the bottom on the right, and that'll be my order for these. But again, because these are all going to be the similar color, I can kind of create that box like I showed you in the texture where we have this area. I can have an area right here for the hilt, and then over here I can separate and paint a color that's going to be similar to the color of the blade. So that's the idea here, is we're just separating it so things that are going to be similar color are pretty much grouped together. So I'm going to come over here Make sure I got the top one. Okay, so that's on the left. And try to arrange your UV shells in an order that's going to make sense to you when you're texturing, so you don't have to say, okay, which one was the top of the ball, which one was the bottom. Just arrange it in a manner that makes sense to you. So I want this on the top, I want that on the bottom, so this is to the left, and this is to the right. See, so that's an order that makes sense to me. And I'm not going to worry too much about the sides of it. So this is good because these are all going to be a fairly similar texture. Well, what else might be this similar texture? Well, this is kind of part of the hilt, so I can select that shell, and I guess I could probably drag this up and put it with those pieces as well. And probably the bottom of the hilt may also be a similar color to the hilt itself. So I'll grab these shells and go ahead and just drag these up. So that way I can set this entire top part up to a fairly similar texture. Now I have all I have left is the handle, and that can kind of just sit right here. That's fine because I can just set a box up just for this handle. So it's surrounded by about 5 to 10 pixels is what you're looking for. You need a bleed distance of about 5 to 10 pixels. I've found is the sweet spot, and you're pretty fine for not running into that texture seam with the LOD. LOD, I mean, is level of detail, or rather the distance. The way to look at it is the distance that you're away from the model in a video game is usually in a lot of engines where you'll see that texture seam pop up and you'll see, okay, this texture had a black background around it. Okay, this kind of goes to the hilt, and this one here as well went to this piece here. And then the last thing I had was this here. Now I'm guessing, you know what, kind of thinking about it, I actually don't want this and this close to that because I think it would be nicer looking if the hilt was a different color than this shaft here. So I'm going to separate these now that I think about it. So I'm going to go ahead and give this its own little area inside the texture map. And I guess if I'm changing the color of that, I'll go ahead and change the color of these as well. So I'll just hold down Shift select all those and go ahead and just drag these down here. Now everything's fairly separated. Now it is a good idea to try to keep all of the UV shells uniform in size to one another. That way you don't have one piece that looks more HD than another. But always, anytime you can, always try to make sure that you're using up as much of the texture area as possible, because there's still, I got all this empty space here, and really I'm not going to worry about it, but you can, if you want, maybe try to scale it up. But again, it may be an issue because the size of your shell. So I might just take these pieces here, and I'm not going to worry so much about it. I'm just going to hit R on my keyboard. I'm just going to scale these up a bit to give me a little bit more room, and that'll make my hilt a little more higher def. And I could probably do the same thing with these, and I'll just scale these up a little bit and kind of move them into place. Now, if I wanted to, I could probably also make the handle a little bit bigger, so I'm going to move everything over. And again, I'm trying to keep everything sort of uniform, so one piece is not going to have a higher definition texture than another. The more texture space a UV takes up, it's equivalent to how high the definition is of that texture. So this area here, if it covered the entire UV span, it would be very high def because this could be like a 1024 by 1024, but yet it's only taking up a small portion right now of that 1024 by 1024 texture. But if it were taking up the whole size of this, it would be taking up the whole 1024 by 1024 resolution, making it a higher resolution than it is now. So this all looks pretty good. I don't want to scale anything up too much because then it'll become too high def and it won't compare correctly. And I think this is a pretty good setup. So in the next video, we're going to go ahead and start building our high definition model that we will use as our normal map for this weapon. If you have any questions or comments, please post below the video on brainpoof.com.